if you go to a time management course, what are you likely to get? Well, let me pull up a few slides on this one, because I think it's actually helpful to see what it is that they address. They address a number of different techniques. And so the first set of techniques that they address has to do with general techniques. And they are about goal setting the right goals, and weekly block planning, managing meetings, and organizing information. Those are kind of the general topics that they cover. And then they also deal with diagnostic techniques, such as time logs. And I've used time logs. In fact, we've created at LDI a time log. And at times that's been actually very helpful. And then there are some other techniques that have to do with prioritization. And you may have come across paired comparisons. That's if you've got a list of 5 things, A, B, C, D, you compare A to B, and then A to C, and A to D, and then A to E. And each time you check which one is most important. When you've done A, you go to B, and you do the same thing, and you keep going through. And you end up with different check marks. And you'll find that the one that has the most check marks, well, that's probably the one you should start with. That's called paired comparisons. There's also deadline and payoff versus payoff. Well, that's kind of obvious, so you can look at it from that perspective. Another one is circle of influence and circle of concern. What on our do list is in our circle of influence, and what is in our circle of concern? In other words, circle of influence that we can really have a direct impact on, and what are the ones that we have less direct impact on? So it's circle of influence. There's also the important and urgent tension. And that's been one that's widely used. Actually, it's a pretty helpful instrument. In fact, let's look at what that actually looks like. If you take important and urgent, you can create a 4 grid. And the top left-hand one is important and urgent. That's stuff that we have to get done because it's important, but also because there's a deadline to it. We've got to get it done by a certain time. There's a certain urgency to it. And we all have things like that, whether they're proposals to get in or something for a client or something to down the production queue, whatever it is. Those are the important and urgent. But then there are things that are important, but they're not urgent. And those are things that don't have a deadline, but they are incredibly important, like building relationships and self-development and developing other people and so on. Those things are important, but they don't necessarily have a deadline attached to them. And then the third one is stuff that's urgent, but not important. And that's someone who comes in and interrupts you in the middle of something, and someone drop in on a phone call or whatever it is. There are a lot of things that are urgent, but not necessarily important. And then the last one is that there's stuff that is neither urgent nor important. Now, generally, we don't spend a lot of time in that one. We do a fairly good job. The problem is that we often neglect the one that is the top right-hand corner, which is important, but not urgent. And that's fundamentally important in leadership. That's what we really need to be focusing on. And the research tells us that we spend an awful lot of time in the bottom left-hand quadrant. Urgent, not important. In fact, somewhere between 60 and 65%, most leaders spend their time in what is urgent and not important. Now, we spend about 25% of our time in the quadrant 1, which is important and urgent, and that's normal. We get that, but we miss the importance of important but not urgent. Now, having said that, what we need to realize, well, how do we figure out how to use these? Why is it that a lot of these techniques, valuable though they are, why is it that they don't work? Why do they not deliver? Why do they not relieve the stress that we're feeling? Well, one of the myths about leadership is that, and time management, is that if I use the right techniques, I'll get control of my time. And that's just not true. We don't get control of our time simply by using the right techniques. And yet that's the problem, is that's what most leadership books and most time management books and time management courses, that's what they focus on. They focus on these techniques. I know, because I taught it. And when I look back at the people that I taught in terms of time management, I don't feel good about it. I'm not sure that I really did them a whole lot of service, because there was something fundamental that I had missed. What is it that I have missed? Well, what is the real problem about time management? Well, the real problem is this. Time management is not a time management issue. It's primarily a leadership issue because of the confusion around leadership. If we could dispel this confusion around leadership, we can get to a much better control of our time. And this confusion, what that means is that leaders don't know what kind of leadership they should be exercising. So they focus on the wrong things. They spend more time on what they shouldn't be and less time on what they should be doing. And because they don't know what they should be doing, they end up going faster in the wrong direction. Paradoxically, they get more efficient at being more efficient at getting more ineffective, if you can follow my train of thought. So, yeah, when you think about those 4 quadrants that we looked at, what is the value of those 4 quadrants if we don't know what's important? And that's the real issue, the confusion around leadership. What we need to understand is that leadership, the effective time management, is fundamentally a leadership issue. And if we get that, we can solve our time management issues. In fact, don't start by getting a grasp on your time. Start by focusing on the right kind of leadership. And when you do that, the time management issues will follow. You'll get the right control of your time. Now, you can tell me, Tony, that's all well and good, but what does that mean? What does it look like to have that, to exercise that kind of leadership? Well, let me give you a few thoughts. Let's look at it this way. Let's think of it in terms of a couple of ways that we can look at leadership. Leadership can be boiled down to a couple of key ideas: competence and character. Everything about leadership falls into those two. Now, in terms of character, we know self-awareness. It's a huge thing. Great leaders out there have tons of self-awareness. They have a moral compass, and they also have the courage to exercise it. On the competence side, there are 3 pieces. There's organizational leadership, and this is embedded, and this is what our total leadership framework actually addresses. There's organizational leadership, there's operational leadership, and there's people leadership. And a lot of the confusion around leadership comes from a confusion of around those 3 concepts. Think of it like this. Think of a ship. The captain of the ship is on the bridge, and that captain's focus is external to the ship, making sure that it gets to the right port of destination, making sure that it doesn't hit any other ship, that it doesn't run aground, that it avoids storms as best as it can, and so on. That's the role of organizational leadership, leading the organization as a whole. That's organizational leadership, leading a ship. But that ship has to run. That captain could be a great captain, but if that ship is dead in the water because the engines aren't working, it doesn't matter how good the captain is. So you have operational leadership. That's the operations within the ship, making sure that the engines are running, making sure that the cooks are cooking in the kitchen and so on, the crew is fed and so on. And then you've got people leadership. And that is making sure you've got the right people in the right jobs. And so that means that you've got the cooks in the kitchen doing what they should be in the kitchen, and you've got the engineers in the engine room doing what they should be in the engine room. You don't switch them around. You don't put the cooks in the engine room. You don't put the engineers in the kitchen. You make sure you got the right people in the right place. Now, if we understand this has huge implications for time management. Let me unpack that a little bit more. When you think about the first 2, organizational leadership and operational leadership, there's a real tension between these 2. And the reason there's a tension is because we typically start out in our careers in a very operational leadership role. And the bulk of the time that we spend, and that's the bottom of that square, that rectangle you see, the entry-level positions in terms of leadership responsibility tend to be much more operationally focused. But then as our responsibilities increase and we get to end up heading a department or heading a business unit or heading a whole organization, then our focus becomes much more like the captain on the bridge. It's much more external, making sure that we're getting this ship, whatever that ship is that we're leaving, whether it's a department or a whole organization, getting it to the right port of destination. Now, here's what happens. When we get promoted, we tend to keep doing what we're doing. And so we end up with something much more like this, where actually we keep doing the operational leadership, we just work harder at it. And we start neglecting what we really should be focusing on is the organizational leadership. Now think about this in terms of time management. Leaders who are doing this are completely mismanaging their time. They are spending time in places they shouldn't be, and they are neglecting things that they really should be doing. This is huge in terms of leadership. It's huge in terms of time management. And if we get this, I guarantee you that you'll have a much better control of your time. If you're doing not this, but if you're doing the other one, no amount of techniques will help you with this. But if you're doing this, techniques can help you, the things that we talked about. But doing this by itself will have a huge impact on the way that you manage your time. So here is the big idea. Focus on your leadership first, and your time management will take care of itself. That's the key thought. If you can take that away, you'll find that this is absolutely life-changing and revolutionary.